They promised the world they would move on. They promised themselves that whatever was once between them would be locked away, never to surface again. But fate never listens to promises, and when Dylan and Shen Yue finally stood face to face after so many months apart, everything they swore to leave behind came rushing back with a force no one could have prepared for. The reunion was not planned. At least, that is what they told everyone. The set was buzzing with energy, cameras being adjusted, lights being tested, crew members hurrying across the floor with clipboards and headsets. And then, as if the air itself had shifted, Shen Yue walked in from one side of the hall, her soft presence sending ripples through the atmosphere. Moments later, Dylan entered from the opposite end, unaware she was even there. When their eyes met, the room changed. Conversations faltered, laughter dimmed, even the steady hum of machines seemed to fade into silence. It was as though the universe itself leaned in to watch what would happen next. Shen Yue froze, her hand clutching the script so tightly her knuckles turned pale. Dylan stopped mid-step, his chest rising and falling as though he had been holding his breath for months. For a second, neither of them moved. And then Dylan did something no one expected. He whispered her name. Not loudly, not in a way meant for others to hear, but softly, almost like a prayer that had been trapped in his heart all this time. That one word carried more weight than an entire speech. Shen Yue's lips parted, but no sound came. Instead, her eyes glistened with the kind of emotion she had worked so hard to bury. She turned quickly, as if walking away could protect her, but Dylan's voice followed her again, firmer this time. Shen Yue, wait. The crew exchanged glances. Some tried to pretend they were not watching, but everyone's attention was fixed on the two of them. Bai Lu, seated quietly nearby, clenched her hands in her lap. She had prepared herself for awkwardness, but not for this raw tension spilling out in front of everyone. Shen Yue finally turned back, her expression a storm of emotions. Anger, pain, longing, all tangled into one. We said we moved on, she whispered, her voice barely audible but sharp enough to pierce the silence. Dylan's reply came, with a tremor in his voice. We said it, yes. But did we ever mean it? The weight of his question hung in the air like smoke. Shen Yue's eyes softened for just a moment, betraying the strength she had tried to wear like armor. Memories flooded her mind. The laughter they once shared, the late nights of endless conversations, the promises whispered in secret when the cameras were off. She had forced herself to believe it was over, but standing before him now, it felt as though the past had never left. Xiao Zhan, who had been standing quietly by the corner, stepped forward as if to intervene, but stopped when he saw the way Dylan was looking at her. It was not the gaze of a co-star or a friend. It was the gaze of a man who had carried a name in his heart every day, even when he swore he had forgotten it. Shen Yue tried to steady her breathing. We cannot go back, she said. You know we cannot. But Dylan shook his head. I am not asking to go back. I am asking you to admit that you never really left. The word struck her like thunder. For a long moment, she said nothing. And then, unable to contain herself, she dropped the script in her hand and stepped closer. The entire set held its breath. Her voice trembled as she finally spoke. Do you know how many nights I stayed awake, telling myself it was over? Do you know how many times I convinced myself you had forgotten me? She paused, tears gathering in her eyes. And yet here you are, standing in front of me, proving that all my strength was nothing against the sound of your voice. Dylan's eyes glistened as he reached out instinctively, his hand hovering in the air as if afraid to actually touch her. Bai Lu shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her heart torn between sympathy and a sharp sting she could not put into words. Xiao Zhan's jaw tightened, his silence carrying more weight than any spoken word. The tension reached its breaking point when Shen Yue took a deep breath and whispered, We should not be here like this. Yet even as she said it, her feet refused to move away. Dylan closed the distance between them, his voice low but firm. We should not, but we are. And maybe that means we were never meant to end. The crew gasped softly, realizing they were not just witnessing an awkward reunion, but the unraveling of something much deeper. Cameras, lights, scripts, everything else faded into the background. What stood at the center of that room was not just two stars who had once shared a story, but two souls still bound together by something no promise to move on could erase. Outside the set, whispers began to spread. Word traveled quickly. By the time the evening sun dipped behind the city, fans online were already speculating, posting, questioning. What really happened between Dylan and Shen Yue? Why did the air between them still carry such electricity? Why did a simple reunion look like destiny breaking through walls built of denial? And as the night fell, one thing became clear. They had promised to move on, but their reunion had changed everything. Nothing would ever be the same again. The room had emptied, the air heavy with an unspoken weight, but neither Dylan nor Shen Yue moved. For a moment, time seemed to stop, the noise of the world fading into silence, as if everything beyond those four walls had vanished. All that remained was him, standing just a few steps away, and her, frozen in place, afraid to breathe, afraid to speak, afraid to shatter the fragile space between them. Dylan's hand trembled slightly, though he tried to hide it in the pocket of his jacket. He had faced cameras, stage lights, and millions of screaming fans without breaking, but now, with Shen Yue's eyes locked on his, he felt stripped of every mask. His chest rose and fell as if the air itself resisted him, and still, he whispered her name again, softer this time, almost like a prayer. Shen Yue. Her breath caught. She had promised herself she would not cry. She had promised that no matter what, she would keep her composure, smile, and pretend she had long since moved on. But hearing her name from his lips, the way he used to say it, with that quiet warmth that carried memories of nights filled with laughter and mornings filled with fragile hopes, it shattered her in an instant. A single tear slipped down her cheek, but she did not look away. Why now, Dylan? Her voice broke, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Why do you have to say my name now, after everything? He took one step closer, hesitant but unable to hold himself back any longer. His eyes glistened, and for the first time in years, Shen Yue saw the boy she had known behind the polished star the world worshipped. Because, he whispered, I never stopped saying it in my head. Her lips trembled, and her hands, clenched at her sides, finally loosened. Memories crashed over her, waves of moments she had buried deep, their late-night talks on set when the cameras were gone, the way he would silently hand her water after a long day, the stolen laughter in crowded rooms where only they understood the joke. She had fought so hard to push those things away, to rewrite her heart so it would no longer spell his name. But in this moment, with his voice trembling and his eyes unguarded, she realized none of it had ever left her. Shen Yue turned her face slightly, as if she could hide from him, but Dylan moved again, bridging the distance until there were only inches left between them. He reached out, his hand hovering in the air, unsure, shaking, caught between the need to touch her and the fear that she would pull away. Her tears came faster now, falling silently, each drop carrying the weight of years spent pretending. Do you regret it? She finally asked, her voice barely audible. Do you regret us? Dylan's jaw tightened. His eyes searched hers with a desperation he could no longer contain. I regret letting the world come between us, he said slowly, deliberately, as if carving the truth into the air. But I will never regret you. The silence that followed was unbearable, the kind of silence that spoke louder than any words. Shen Yue's heart pounded in her chest, and though she tried to steady herself, she felt the walls she had built begin to crumble. He noticed. He always noticed. Without another thought, Dylan's hand finally closed the distance, brushing against her cheek. The touch was so light, so hesitant, but it was real. And the moment his skin met hers, Shen Yue closed her eyes, surrendering to a truth she had tried for so long to deny. Her tears dampened his fingers, but he didn't pull back. Instead, he leaned closer, his voice trembling, fragile, but filled with a weight that had been locked away for too long. Tell me I'm not the only one who still feels this, he pleaded softly. Tell me you didn't erase me. Shen Yue opened her eyes slowly, staring into his, The words caught in her throat. She wanted to tell him she had erased him, that she had built a new life without him, that she no longer cared. But every fiber of her being betrayed her. The way her hand shook, the way her tears kept falling, the way her eyes clung to his, it was all the answer he needed. She couldn't lie. Not to him. Not anymore. And in that raw silence, in the weight of unspoken confessions, the world outside no longer mattered. For Dylan and Shen Yue, there were no cameras, no agencies, no expectations. Just them, standing in the wreckage of promises they could not keep, holding on to a love that refused to die. One last tear slid down Shen Yue's cheek, and this time, Dylan caught it with his thumb. He smiled faintly, broken but sincere. "It's not over," he whispered. Her lips parted, trembling, as she whispered back, "It never was." The air between them shifted, heavy with a truth they could no longer bury. And in that moment, though nothing was resolved, though the world outside still waited with questions and judgments, one thing was certain: their story was not finished. It was only beginning again.